A revolution is on the horizon.
The revolution where people are reinventing the way we do business.
A revolution led by entrepreneurs and inventors creating new ways to power our planet.
Biofuels can make huge difference, billions of gallons worth of difference.
A revolution where power will come from the sun, wind, water, and heat embedded in the earth.
I always knew that the value was in the hot water.
A revolution that will drive a whole new economy.
I'm not an environmentalist, I'm a capitalist.
It will be the biggest new industry, the biggest new source of jobs, the biggest new source of wealth in America. One of the new frontiers in harnessing clean energy is an old one, the Alaska wilderness. Underneath thousands of miles of untamed lands sits a natural source of untapped energy. Tourists have been making the pilgrimage to Chena Hot Springs west of Fairbanks for over a century. The warm waters are said to cure everything from arthritis to rheumatism.
Welcome to Chena Hot Springs. Go over and use the water. You're going to feel 10 years younger.
When Bernie Carl decided to build a hotel here, he had a different vision for the healing waters.
I always knew that the value was in the hot water, and I always knew I would make electricity.
Frontiersman Carl does not fit the classic profile of an energy guru. He isn't a venture capitalist flush with cash, and he isn't formally educated. Yet today, he is a celebrated pioneer of geothermal energy.
500 gallons every day of oil I'm replacing. Everyone says, why do you do this? Why do you do it? I do it for my grandkids.
Entrepreneurs like Bernie Carl see opportunity in the gathering forces of a perfect storm. A deepening recession, a dangerous dependence on foreign oil, and an environment that, according to scientists, is on the brink of disaster.
We've all heard about the concerns of global warming, associated sea level rise, more intense weather. It's the biggest threat that's facing humanity now.
And the biggest culprit is probably fossil fuels. The International Energy Agency reports we dump 80 million tons of carbon dioxide into our atmosphere every day. The cutting and burning of tropical rainforests adds millions of tons more.
That is the story all of us know. The story of Earth, the sequel, is what happens next.
Fred Krupp is president of the Environmental Defense Fund and co-author of the book, Earth, the Sequel. His organization was one of the first to warn of the dangers of global warming.
We need to reduce global warming pollution by at least 80%. We're going to need every solution we can get, from solar energy to wind power to reducing deforestation.
Protecting the world's forests that lock up carbon would have an immediate and immense impact. But Krupp, along with many business and political leaders, argues that our planet's long-term future depends on the U.S. setting a legal limit on its own greenhouse gases.
There is no law, no restriction, no limits whatsoever on just throwing that garbage into our atmosphere, because the United States, the biggest market in the world, has not yet passed a cap on carbon. Once the government does that, it can stand back, because the stars of the show are going to be the entrepreneurs and the engineers lining up to help solve this problem.
Visionaries like Bernie Carl.
You've heard of the Great Wall of China. This is the Great Wall of China. There's 400 tons of ice here.
Carl's dream for clean energy began in 2003. With 15,000 tons of ice and snow, the building blocks of an ice hotel. But Carl's $750 a day diesel-powered chiller wasn't enough to withstand the summer when Alaska becomes the land of the midnight sun.
We had a small problem. It melted. Forbes magazine voted the dumbest business idea of the year. It melted because I didn't understand the physics of heating and cooling.
Determined to keep his ice structure frozen year-round, he looked to China's renowned hot springs to generate refrigeration and eventually electricity.
This well's 750 feet deep, and this is where we're getting our production, right here. And right now we have about right at 160 degrees.
Heat energy is continually regenerated in the Earth's crust. Where underground water comes in contact with deep hot rocks, it can reach 700 degrees. 4 times hotter than China's water. So Carl came up with a solution.
We take this water and we heat up 134A refrigerant, the same refrigerant that's in your automobile. It boils at 40 degrees. Water boils at 212.
Carl's system takes the lukewarm water from the springs and pumps it through a heat exchanger that heats up the refrigerant, vaporizing it into a gas. The pressurized gas then spins a turbine, which in turn spins a generator.
200 kW, this is enough electricity to run 200 homes.
Today, Carl has 3 geothermal power generators on his property. Together, the units provide enough electricity to power and feed the entire resort year-round.
On the 21st of December is the winter solstice. The sun will not come above the mountain for several months. We grow 365 days a year. We run 44 buildings. We have 65 employees that live here, that we house and we feed. We had over 100,000 people come and visit here this year.
In one practical, inventive stroke, Carl not only got what he wanted for his hotel, he revolutionized geothermal power.
And now, thanks to him, United Technologies is exporting these Chino low-temperature geothermal units all over the world. It's a whole new division of United Technologies.
Experts say geothermal could provide 10 to 15% of our energy needs by 2025. Fred Krupp and many other leaders argue that government action is necessary to accelerate development of resources like geothermal.
The only way we encourage solar, geothermal, and all the other alternatives and solve global warming is if the policy actually limits the amount of pollution that can go into the sky.
A national cap-and-trade policy would set a declining limit, or cap, on each company's greenhouse gas emissions, but also allow them to sell, or trade, unused pollution allowances in a new commodities market. Such a policy is already in place in Europe, Japan, and Canada. Many investors, political leaders, and even CEOs of some of the world's largest corporations argue that the U.S. must now join in.
Once the government fires this starting gun, that's when this race will really begin.
Once we look at things being resources instead of being problems, once we take every one of these global warming issues and make them an opportunity, we will do something about it.
In the heart of Silicon Valley, an Irish physicist is revolutionizing solar energy one molecule at a time.
This is a completely radical way to think about how a semiconductor material can be deployed.
Coming up next. In a dusty corner of the Nevada desert sits the largest collection of solar panels in North America. The installation, housed on Nellis Air Force Base, stretches over 140 acres of desert.
We're seeing about 5.8 million cells built into 72,000 panels.
Matt Cheney is the CEO of MMA Renewables, who developed a bold new business model to install the panels that supply over a quarter of the energy needs of the base, carbon-free.
It's like planting 260,000 trees. It's like taking 185,000 cars off the road.
If we think about the energy system of the future, I think we're going to have a combination of renewable energy resources, and number one is the sun. There's 10 times more sunshine that hits the Earth every single year than we need for all of our energy consumption.
There are many ways to capture the sun's energy. Photovoltaic solar cells like these are the most widely used. When sunlight shines on these cells, the energy of the absorbed light knocks electrons free. The freed electrons create an electric current. A conductive grid carries the current across the surface of the cell. A great benefit of solar energy is that its output peaks when the weather is sunny and hot, precisely the time of day when power is needed most.
We call that the good match, meaning that we produce power when you're using more of it.
All that clean green energy, however, doesn't come cheap. The upfront cost to make and install photovoltaic panels is steep, and at this scale, it can be overwhelming.
It's a very large investment, costs over $100 million to build.
Cheney's company finances, owns, and operates the solar farm, and then sells the power directly to the Air Force at a fixed rate for 20 years. For the Air Force, there is no upfront cost.
We raise capital and debt and put it all together into a package.
It's a financial model that Cheney is rolling out nationally.
Doing something like this not only makes sense, but is effectively a low-risk proposition.
Here in Northern California, in the heart of Silicon Valley, an Irish physicist is radically cutting the cost of making the solar cells and looking to make lots of money by doing so.
I'm not an environmentalist, I'm a capitalist. It's very, very important that we just embrace capitalism with environmentalism, because I think that's where the solutions will be.
Conrad Burke and his company Innovolite are engineering materials at the atomic scale, converting silicon into a liquid form.
This is a completely radical way to think about how a semiconductor material can be deployed. Would you have any recommendations?
Burke has made a career of being a maverick. He left Ireland at 21 to pursue the high-tech wave in Japan, and went on to become the youngest director ever at AT&T and Lucent.
I like technology. I like things that are difficult and that go against the mainstream. Is this going into the ink group then straight after this?
Innovolite's remarkable technology takes tiny particles of silicon powder called nanocrystals and chemically liquefies them in ink. The solution can then be printed onto any surface with an off-the-shelf industrial printer.
We can actually deposit a semiconductor material fast, using less material, and thereby building up cheap solar cells.
This is a dramatic breakthrough because it means that almost any surface can become a solar cell. We can paint silicon materials onto roofing and bring down the cost of having solar installations on your roof by a factor of 10.
With Innovolite's nanotechnology, the ability to harvest light energy is also vastly improved.
There potentially could reach efficiencies that would dwarf anything that's on the market now.
One of Burke's remaining roadblocks will be converting his team's successful work in the lab into large-scale production.
While there are a lot of naysayers and a lot of people will say that won't work or that looks way too difficult, we have continued to buck that and say, we're going to do it, we're going to accomplish this, and we have, and we will.
There's another way to tap the sun's energy called solar thermal, which offers strong near-term potential to provide clean energy at a price and scale competitive with coal. The established solar thermal systems use troughs or towers. These newer sun catchers on the sun-baked slopes outside Albuquerque, New Mexico, are the creation of Sterling Energy Systems and its director, Bruce Osborne.
I was a young engineer at Ford Motor Company. I was one of the original solar pioneers that came up with the concept of combining a parabolic dish concentrator and a heat engine to generate electricity. Sterling Energy Systems has now been quietly perfecting the technology over the last decade so that it'll be scalable for utility-scale solar.
The sun catcher tracks the sun across the sky. Its 82 curved glass mirrors concentrating the sun's heat.
It's very analogous to a magnifying glass. When you were a kid, you take the magnifying glass with the sun and focus it down to a point, and you could burn leaves or paper. So we take all that energy and we put it in the center there on the heater heads.
The heater head is the receiver unit of the sun catcher's Stirling engine,
which converts the sun's heat into electricity by using that heat to expand hydrogen gas.
Concentrated sunlight comes in and heats these tubes.
Engineer Chuck Andraka has been working on solar thermal engines for 23 years.
Inside these tubes, we have a gas going back and forth. Heat up that gas expands, and it moves a piston. And that turns this generator over here, and it's directly coupled to the grid. So this makes 480-volt, three-phase power directly into the grid.
The Suncatcher is also highly efficient.
25% of the energy that we collect from the sun gets converted directly into electricity. And that's a huge advantage over the other types of technologies.
California signed into law the nation's first cap on carbon in 2006. As a result, 2 large California utilities have recently contracted with several solar thermal companies. Among them, Sterling Energy. Thousands of Suncatcher systems will generate enough electricity to meet the needs of more than 1 million homes.
This will create many thousands of jobs just for these projects.
What California has discovered is that it's actually a money-making enterprise. It's the greatest economic opportunity out there.
Growing big wind in Texas.
Sweetwater's probably the #2 community in the world for wind energy.
Coming up next. In the race to harness renewable energy, nothing can catch the speed of wind. It is one of the fastest growing and most widely used electricity sources in the world today. Giant wind turbines are not only radically transforming the power system, they are changing the very landscape of the wind-rich plains.
Before the wind turbines came to this area, it was mainly ranch work and small construction jobs. When wind came, lots of job opportunities came up and of course, a lot better pay.
Larry Kenny, a Mitsubishi wind technician, leads a maintenance crew on a wind farm in Sweetwater.
Here at Sweetwater Phase 4, we're responsible for 135 Mitsubishi turbines. Each one of these wind turbines generates 1 megawatt of power.
Growing the wind industry in Sweetwater was the vision of Mayor Greg Wortham.
Here, there were some of the largest projects in the world, and no one in the region seemed to be talking about it. We weren't promoting ourselves to gain the manufacturing jobs.
Just a few years later, Wortham's Texas-sized ambition was realized. Nolan County, where Sweetwater is located, is now the #1 wind market in America, currently producing over 2,500 megawatts of power, enough to power up to 750,000 homes.
Wind has taught some really important lessons. We can come down the cost curve, we can deploy this stuff on scale, but that only happens if there are policy supports for it.
Modern wind technology has not only come a long way from its roots, it has continued to evolve. These turbines soar over 200 feet, or some 20 stories, into the Texas sky. Just installing them is an enormous and expensive undertaking. Kenny's job is to keep them in good working order.
We're in Roscoe, Texas, up top of Mitsubishi 1000A. We're at 220 feet. This is the main shaft of the turbine. Goes here into the gearbox. Has a high-speed shaft in the back that ups the RPMs that goes into the generator where the electricity is produced.
The electricity is then transferred to a substation where it is sent to the power grid.
This wind turbine is basically a robot. It tells itself what direction it needs to be pointed to, when to stop itself, what pitch the blades need to be to get the most generation of electricity.
Even with an established technology like wind, there are still great challenges.
Wind is a tremendously large resource. There is about 60 times more wind energy than we humans use today. But like sun, it's intermittent.
If you're going to use wind for a big part of your electricity supply, you need a way to store that energy for the times when people need it.
One company, General Compression, is developing dispatchable wind power systems that compress air to high pressure, then store it underground. They may unlock the secret of storing wind, but there is another challenge wind faces: transmission. Moving the power from the turbine farms in the Central Plains across hundreds of miles to major urban centers is costly, and the power grid is out of date.
The traditional transmission system is set up for 50 years ago or so, where power plants were close to the loads. The wind is out in remote rural areas of the Great Plains, and so transmission grids have to be designed to service those metropolitan areas.
Dallas, Fort Worth, San Antonio. Next 7 years, they'll have a lot of it done back to the big cities.
One way to bypass the transmission challenge is small or urban wind projects that generate power for local usage. At this site in New York City, 6 Silvery turbines feed power directly to the Brooklyn Navy Yard.
That's the beauty of small wind. It's used on site. You don't have to worry about transmission.
Paul Glenny is head of AeroVironment's architectural wind project. His ambition is simple: to use the company's expertise in aviation to create a turbine that is sleek and low impact.
Everything we do is about efficiency, performance. And so in all of our businesses, from the unmanned aircraft systems to the efficient energy systems, everything is all about doing more with much less.
Glenny's turbines exploit the flow of wind over the edge of a building.
We found that a building creates a chimney effect. If you've ever stood and put your hand over a cliff, you've felt that upflow of air. Well, that's accelerated wind. If we can leverage that accelerated wind, we can also create more electricity. We place it on these low-profile, low-aspect ratio buildings, such as factories, big-box stores, office buildings. If you know where that accelerated wind flow is coming from, you can actually point the wind turbine into that accelerated wind flow.
Architectural wind turbines feed power directly to the power system of a building. When the customer isn't using power, the wind's energy is sent to the grid.
If you're not using electricity in the building at the time, it will actually turn your meter backwards. And is that going to add cost to the system, or?
No, it should reduce cost, if anything.
Architectural wind's greatest challenge is bringing its product to scale.
We need consistent, long-term federal policies that will give the market a signal for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years that says we are making a commitment to renewable energy. Then the customer can decide what technologies they want to employ.
The fact that the price of producing energy from wind turbines has been dropping, and the fact that wind is readily available makes it a big part of America's energy future.
Harnessing energy in challenging waters.
We were living literally in survival suits during that time.
Coming up next. Of all the frontiers being explored by the new energy prospectors, the oceans and tidal straits may be the most uncharted.
A marine environment is a terrifically challenging environment to work in.
Water is about 850 times more dense than air. Then with the speed of the current, that's tremendous forces.
That force means power, and Trey Taylor, the president and co-founder of Verdant, is tapping the energy of New York City's East River. Taylor's bold experiment began in 2002 with a single turbine. The initial results were encouraging, so his team anchored 6 more turbines, this time in the near-freezing December waters.
Probably one of the coldest times in New York, and so it was ice on our vessel and ice on our helmets, and we were living literally in survival suits during that time.
Almost immediately, there were setbacks. The tremendous pressure of the tidal water began to break the turbine blades, forcing Verdant to pull the turbines out of the water.
The blades didn't break all at once. One would break, then a few days later, the one beside it would do the same.
Taylor and his engineers set about redesigning the turbine blades, using stronger materials and constructing the turbines around a more rigid internal frame.
What we learned was how to better array these underwater to actually get more energy out with even less environmental impact.
In the fall of 2008, Verdant set 4 new and improved turbines in the East River. Their latest design works much like a wind turbine. The tidal currents of the East River propel the turbine's 3-bladed axial rotor, which makes 1 rotation every 2 seconds. When the tide shifts, the turbine rotates on its axis to exploit the water's power in the opposite direction.
The wonderful thing about tidal power is it is very, very predictable and reliable. You can predict tidal power 200 years ahead of time.
And unlike ocean power, where generators are often anchored miles offshore, Taylor makes his power at the very heart of a population center.
Our desire is to build plants, for the most part, right into the local distribution grid, bypassing the transmission system.
Right now, the electricity generated from each 35-kilowatt tidal turbine is powering a nearby parking garage and grocery store.
So everything we're designing is keeping local resources in mind. What we want to be able to do is create cost-affordable systems that villages and communities from all over the world can apply to their waterways.
Within a year, Verdant hopes to install up to 30 turbines in the East River.
The beginning of having perhaps as many as 300 turbines in the East River. But keep in mind, this is just one reach. There could be other pockets all around New York City and certainly the New York State producing power in this manner.
Electricity generation is not the only source of greenhouse gases. Transportation accounts for 1/3 of global warming pollution. This is why developing clean transportation alternatives is also crucial for our planet's survival.
Certainly, you couldn't say biofuels are going to cure everything. But can biofuels be a key player? Yeah, it can make huge difference, billions of gallons worth of difference.
Jack Newman is co-founder and head of research of Amyris Biotechnologies, a Northern California biofuels company. As a scientist and environmental activist, Newman and several colleagues found a way to help save the planet without leaving the lab.
We determined early on that we could make a killer diesel product in a microbe. It'll work in today's diesel engines. It's got all the power and torque that you need, and it can reduce greenhouse gases by up to like 80%.
Newman's journey began in 2003 in the chemical engineering lab at Berkeley, where he and 2 friends discovered a way to genetically modify yeast to make medicine.
We started making an anti-malarial drug very, very inexpensively, and then it was, geez, what else can we make? And what other things could have a really big impact in the world?
The ambitious trio formed Amyris with the goal of making a biofuel from the same microbiological process.
A reprogramming of the chemical root that exists within yeast. Plants make a hydrocarbon-based covering on their leaves so that water doesn't get inside. And by taking some of the programming from plants and putting it into a yeast strain that's really good at making ethanol, you can get a yeast strain that's really good at making a hydrocarbon. We build on improvement. We'll take probably the last strain that was pretty good at making diesel and try to put the next idea into it via DNA to make the next generation of strain.
Each of these colonies here corresponds from a single cell. That single cell ideally has the change that we believe we've made.
And from that colony, you can grow up a liquid culture. Basically just put it into sugarcane juice.
What we're seeing is the relative size here of the production strain of yeast, all of these small spheres here. These larger spheres are accumulated fuel.
Once you get a hit, something that's better, then you move into a fermentation tank that's, about the size of a bread box. That idea that you had, manifested through DNA and expressed in yeast, ends up turning sugar into fuel.
Well, this is our fuel, and this is petroleum diesel fuel. There are more impurities in this one than in this one. That's a much purer product.
Corn ethanol has captured the lion's share of federal subsidies in the U.S., and vast tracts of land have been diverted from growing food to growing corn for ethanol. But it has distinct drawbacks.
We quickly came to see that it was not a good idea to be burning food to make energy.
Newman and his team use Brazilian sugarcane to make their fuel because it is the most efficient and inexpensive feedstock currently available. They are partnering with a Brazilian company to build their first large-scale biorefinery.
There's an entire infrastructure built out around making billions of gallons of fuel in Brazil.
Already, Amyris is producing fuel in its new pilot plant. And by 2010, they hope to be able to produce fuel on a scale that can compete with traditional fossil fuels at less than $2 a gallon.
To actually have a hit that gets you to production scale, you just pinch yourself. It's amazing when it works. Science is amazing when it works.
Coming up next, making fuel with enzymes found in the most extreme places. And the ultimate green sports car. Among the sugarcane flats of southern Louisiana, a former brewmaster is making ethanol from the waste byproduct of the sugarcane plant.
I was making beer then, and we're making beer now. But the beer we're making now can have dramatic effects on what's happening, not just here in this country, but all over the world.
As Director of Technology Development at Verenium, Russ Heisner brings his experience brewing beer you drink to the brewing of ethanol.
A lot of the process engineering and the basic design work is something that you might find in a brewery.
But what's different is Verenium makes its ethanol from bagasse, the pulp or dry waste left after the juice has been squeezed from the stems of sugarcane and other fibrous crops. So the food for fuel conflict isn't an issue.
Cellulose is every plant matter you can think of that you can't eat. It's wood, it's corn stalks, it's corn husks, it's grasses, it's leaves. All of that indigestible plant matter is composed of cellulose.
At Verenium's plant, the biomass is pumped full of water and acid, then exposed to heat and pressure, creating a steam explosion that splits the tough fibers and spits a sugary syrup into one tank and a cellulosic mass into another. Rare, powerful enzymes break down the tough strands of cellulose into fermentable sugars. Microbes then turn the sugars into ethanol. The secret to Verenium's technology is the enzymes.
Verenium has gone out bioprospecting for organisms that can survive in places like glaciers and volcanoes, mine the enzymes out of them, and then use their amazing laboratories in San Diego with these robots that can look at 1 million enzymes at a time to find the enzymes that are most effective.
With its pilot plant fully operational, Verenium is now poised to open its first demonstration plant, where they anticipate greater biofuel yields than anything achieved with corn ethanol.
The ethanol yield per acre for corn plants is roughly in the magnitude of about 300 gallons per acre. We're more in the magnitude of around 1,800 to 2,000 gallons per acre.
By 2011, Verenium hopes to scale up to commercial production, brewing 36 million gallons of cellulosic ethanol a year.
I think the biggest challenge is going to be, do we have a political will to foster these industries in their infancy? Market-based mechanisms such as a carbon cap and trade policy will allow for investment in technologies that have a negative carbon footprint.
Cap and trade, it'll change the game. All of a sudden, we will start valuing carbon footprint, whereas right now we do not at all. It's almost as if, you can put your trash on the street and you're not paying for anybody to pick it up. It would be a game changer.
We are going to have to change the engine that drives our transport. Ecologists believe
Reducing greenhouse gases from automobiles won't just come from the fuel tank. The greatest impact may come from the fully charged electric car. It's touted as the weapon that will one day slay our giant appetite for foreign oil. With history stacked against them, Tesla Motors set out to prove that an all-electric car can be powerful, sleek, and green. The Roadster is all that and more.
0 to 60 miles an hour is 3.9 seconds and a range of 244 miles per charge. So that makes it the fastest and farthest production electric car ever produced.
Tesla Motors was funded by the visionary entrepreneur Elon Musk, who made his billions selling his high-tech creations Zip2 and PayPal. Next, he built SpaceX, a private rocket-building company.
I wrote my first commercial program when I was 12, and also made rockets and explosive incendiary devices just for fun.
With no prior car experience, but an abundance of determination, Musk is now chairman, CEO, and product architect of Tesla Motors. With its headquarters in Silicon Valley, in many ways, Tesla sees itself as a high-tech company.
The value I saw in helping create Tesla was accelerating the transition to electric cars.
Musk sees his Roadster as the bridge to a whole new generation of electric vehicles. With a sale price of $109,000,
Pick a technology, I guarantee you it started out expensive and it got cheap over time. Gasoline cars, jets, computers, any new technology takes time to optimize.
despite its many remarkable advances, Tesla has had serious setbacks. After numerous delays and funding roadblocks, the company was forced to cut over 20% of its workforce and suspend the launch of its lower-priced sedan. In the meantime, Tesla has already had a huge impact beyond the 50 cars it currently has on the road. It helped inspire General Motors to build the Chevy Volt, a plug-in electric hybrid scheduled to hit the market in 2010. Another Silicon Valley technology company is fast coming up in the rearview mirror. Dan Reicher is head of Google's Recharge It program.
The whole point here is to encourage the large auto companies and hopefully some new small ones as well to begin making plug-in vehicles and getting them to market in a big, big way.
The Recharge It program takes regular hybrids and converts them to plug-in electric vehicles for use by Google employees. The fleet is powered with solar panels installed at Google's headquarters. Months of study by Reicher's team attest to the converted plug-in's high efficiency.
Plug-in Toyota Priuses, in terms of their mileage, are 70, 80, 90 miles per gallon. Typically, a non-plug-in is about 45 miles per gallon.
Google's latest experiment is in vehicle-to-grid technology, which will one day allow a utility to tell a car's battery when to charge and when to send electricity back to the grid.
Right now, the electricity load drops really low at night and really spikes during the day. If you can level out that load, in part by having this storage system where you can tap this stored electricity rather than firing up another natural gas plant, you'll get rid of a ton of carbon emissions, many tons.
Whether the solutions come from Silicon Valley or Detroit, one thing is clear. The more entrepreneurs stepping up to create the car of the future, the better.
We do need to cap climate emissions. It will provide major stimulus to the kind of important technological changes we need to make: more plug-in vehicles, more renewable electricity, more energy efficiency.
If you're trying to accelerate the progress of an industry, those government incentives can be very powerful and really make the difference in whether we become a sustainable energy economy in 20 years or 40 years.
Coming up, the electric grid of the future.
A smart grid is a grid which has the intelligence to move quickly energy from place to place.
Boulder, Colorado is not only a nice place to live, it's one of the first cities in the nation working to make its electric grid smart and interactive, like the internet.
A smart grid is a grid which has the intelligence to accommodate a variety of intermittent sources of energy and to move quickly energy from place to place to respond to changing consumer needs.
Sensors installed by Xcel Energy throughout Boulder's transmission system enable the grid to sense its own strengths and weaknesses, much like a living organism.
We now see on our system for the first time
all of the devices on the electric grid, and we're able to go out proactively and replace them before they fail.
It's not just about integrating, it's about the whole network of wires, transformers being monitored 24/7 real time.
Smart meters installed in homes and businesses help consumers use less electricity and buy it when it's cheapest and cleanest.
I have a custom dashboard, a web portal, and it's updated about every 15 minutes or more. And I can change the temperatures so that I can save energy and save on my energy bill.
Xcel Energy partnered with the University of Colorado at Boulder to make the Chancellor's residence a model smart grid home. The home is partially powered by solar panels and a plug-in hybrid vehicle.
I can come home, I can plug in, and I can discharge energy back to my house to power it, and I can also sell energy, extra energy, back to the grid.
The energy system of the future will tie efficiency and renewable technologies together. But coal, which supplies half our electricity and 80% of China's, can't be ignored. Utilities have plans to build more than 100 new coal-fired power plants in the United States in the next few years. That will mean millions of tons of new emissions for decades, say Fred Krupp and many other leaders, unless there is a cap on carbon.
Because then the builders of the power plants begin to realize it's not economical to build coal-fired power plants without capturing the CO2.
The future of our Earth, the sequel, can succeed. We have all the imagination and entrepreneurial spirit to turn back the threat to our planet. The one thing we don't have is time.
Renewable energy is not for the faint of heart. It takes a lot of fortitude. It takes a lot of money. It's a real David and Goliath story. They will lose unless they get the kind of policy backing that they need.
Back at the Chena Hot Springs Resort in Alaska, it's an ordinary day for Bernie Carl.
We're going to move the well house, putting a new roof on the lodge, and we'll be doing some new things over in the greenhouse.
Carl won't stop until he's completely energy independent. Ultimately, Carl hopes to send power to the people in Fairbanks.
April, we're going to drill a deep hole. The geochemistry of the water tells us we're going to hit 240-degree water. If in fact that is true, then I will put in 10 megawatts of power here.
Back in Sweetwater, Texas, after wind blew into town, the entire economy changed.
It's been tremendous in terms of the numbers of transportation jobs, construction jobs. You can see the folks from 16 to 70 are working in this industry and making more money than they've made at least since the last oil depression about 20 years ago.
People are beginning to understand that, in fact, the greatest job opportunity out there lies in rebuilding our energy infrastructure.
We're at the beginning phase of what's going to be one of the largest growth spurts in history. While we feel pretty good about what we're doing, I think it feels even greater being able to make huge profits, huge returns for investors, and feel really good about it and doing something good for the planet.
The entrepreneurs and the engineers that figure out new ways to power our machines, to light our homes, new ways that are pollution-free. That is going to be the great story of the beginning of this new century.